Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming to see us. I'm Jim. This is Dee. If you've been following us for a while, you know who we are and what we're like, sort of. But right now, we're ready to start on. I think it's our 11th, our 11th episode of At Home with Jim and Dee. I've been had for having to redo one and getting sick for another one. We'd have a couple more. So we've been doing this since the beginning of the year. And we have a lot of ideas that we've been kicking around. We've had a lot of suggestions from people wanting us to do other things that would probably be things that we wouldn't do here on Tuesday nights. But we've had some people asking us to do some classes on creativity and some people asking about songwriting and things like that. And we're trying to decide how to best do that. We might find that those things are better done. Not necessarily. Well, I don't know. We could just do them as where like most people do, where they shoot a YouTube video and then put it up later, or we could do it as a webinar. The advantage of a webinar is that we can have real-time chat with people. It's more like having a class where if people have questions they can ask and so on. To do the webinar would take both more time and more resources that we don't necessarily have right now. Someone had recommended a particular webinar software that is very expensive, at least from our point of view, and we can't do that one for sure. I mean, we'd have to come up with like $1,000 right up front just to get started. As you can tell, because we're giving this stuff away free on the web, but this is not a money-making venture for us. And we do sing around locally and so on to try to put food on the table. So we're trying to decide what the best way to deal with all this is. And we don't know yet quite how we're going to do it, but we're going to try to look at doing it in the near future if we can. For those of you that haven't tried this kind of thing before, this thing here, what we're doing is kind of live, and it's kind of simple because we know we gives ourselves about 30 minutes, and we just press start. And although tonight it just kept saying start streaming, and I'd click on it, and then it'd say start streaming, and I'd click on it, and it wouldn't start. I finally refreshed my web browser, and then it went ahead and started. So if we're a couple minutes late, that's why. But we're going to, we've also, it seems like people have been wanting to hear some more stories, more things about the Jesus movement. I know that a couple of years ago when we were traveling with Winky Patton, we were in Florida, and there was a whole church that was full of young people who were saying they were asking God for another Jesus movement. And I'm hoping that God will give them something new.
Something better.
Something better. I mean, there were some great things, and we may have talked about it some, and we'll probably talk about it more. But our personal journey took us through that from two different sides, and we came together in the middle. And one of the things that happened for us was in October of 1971, we joined a ministry called the Agape Force. Now, we didn't really know each other that well, but we both felt a calling, and she had a car, and I could drive, so so we got together and headed off for this ministry. And about probably, I want to say maybe 4 to 6 weeks after we joined the ministry, they decided they were going to record an album. Now, this was an album that actually, I don't know how many records it sold. I don't have those numbers. I never heard the numbers. I'm sure it was probably, probably at least 10,000, probably not more than 20, 30,000. I don't know. I've been told by some that it was a very popular album actually in Vietnam. I don't know how it even got there. If someone took it, just made cassettes, I don't know. I've heard some stories about it, but basically what it was a group of about 30 of us who got together in the choir loft of a church, and Winky Patton brought his big reel-to-reel 2-track recorder We set up a couple of microphones, and we recorded everything live in the choir loft. And that album came out, and now since I can't see myself, I can only see my web browser. I'm hoping that you guys can see this. This was the result. This was the first album that the Agape Force made. It was called the Agape Force Unchoir. Now you may be wondering how we got the name the Unchoir. Well, back in the late '60s, early '70s, there was an advertising campaign put on by a soft drink company. That soft drink company was 7-Up, and they called themselves the Uncola. Well, another evangelist, and I believe his name was Mario Murillo, once heard us sing, and he dubbed us the Unchoir, because in fact
We were so bad.
we were so bad. But the thing is, things still happened. God still moved because the Holy Spirit showed up, and that's the only thing we had going for us, really. But about 4 to 6 weeks into our journey with the Agape Force, they decided to record this album. And this was one of the songs. This was actually I think this was, this is the last song on the album. It was a song that was written by a couple of friends of ours, Barry McGuire and Greg Lanson. And it was a song that we wanted to do for you guys, because we've been thinking that maybe you guys would like to know about some of the early music that was happening in the Jesus movement, and this was one of the songs. This song was called "Doesn't That Bible Say?" Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome? Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome? Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by the power of the Lord, by the Spirit of God? We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. The Hebrew children in the fiery furnace, Daniel in the lion's den. What did they do when things got tough? They put their trust in Him. Oh, now doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome? Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome? Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by the power of the Lord, and by the Spirit of God? The Bible says that we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. Jonah was down in the belly of a whale. Elijah was challenging the prophets of Baal. Noah was in the ark without a sail. They knew that God would never fail. Now does that Bible say we shall overcome? Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome? Doesn't that Bible say we shall overcome by the blood of the Lamb, by the power of
Now, another thing about that song is that the way we sang it just now wasn't exactly the way we always used to sing it. We would blow all our microphones out if we sang it like we used to sing it. We would shout it at the top of our lungs.
Yeah, we are having to restrain ourselves because of our equipment setup. We don't have the right kinds of
compressors.
Yeah, compressors and things we need to really sing it and belt it out. Because then if we sang the soft songs, you wouldn't be able to hear us at all. But go ahead and sing.
I remember one of the first times that I was with the Agape Force when we sang that song was when we were marching down the street
Palm Springs?
in Palm Springs, singing that song. And everybody used to protest back then. Marches were common, but not many people saw teenagers marching for Jesus. I guess we need to move right along.
Well, I'd like you to at least turn the page so I know what song comes next.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
I can do that.
Yeah. Can you? I can do it.
It's not connected.
It's because it's set too long and turned off. Yeah. You can turn it back on or you can just leave it.
What are you going to talk about?
Oh yeah, I didn't know what you're doing. Yeah, when we have also talked about maybe telling our stories, and we've told some stories about ourselves, and I'm always a little
reticent.
Yeah, I'm a little reticent to tell certain parts of my story. Because as Harry Conn used to say, you have to know the bad news before the good news means anything. And I had plenty of bad news, at least enough for me, when I was a teenager particularly. And what keeps dinging?
I think it's email over there.
And I was talking to someone recently, and we were talking about parenting, because Dee and I do a children's class on Sunday mornings at our church, and it seems that parenting has become much more of a challenge than it was when we were young parents and when our parents were parents. There's a lot more challenges to it than there used to be, but and I don't claim to have 20/20 hindsight like people say that they do, but I have enough experience now to look back and say that my parents didn't really do a whole lot of parenting as such. And so that meant I did a lot of things wrong because I didn't have anyone really correcting me in a lot of instances, or guiding me or giving me information up front that I might have needed to do better. Now, my parents didn't know the Lord at all, and so they didn't know a lot of things that I knew when I became a parent, and I still look back and see all the mistakes I made as a parent. And so it was a tough thing, but when I finally did give my life to Christ, it was a serious issue for me. It was a real thing. I had been reading the New Testament for the last 6 months before that, and when I finally gave my life to Christ, and then I started looking around at the people that I knew, which was about, I didn't know them all, but there were about 300 kids in the youth group that I attended. But when I finally yielded to Christ, it was hard for me to understand them because they didn't seem to take this as seriously as I did. We go to a retreat somewhere, and the guys be out there stuffing peas up their nose and blowing them at the girls, and just I don't know, just stuff that I know it's just kid stuff, but they didn't seem to have. I guess it's like Jesus said, "He who is forgiven much loves much," and I think a lot of these kids had grown up in church, and they didn't maybe have as much to be forgiven for as I did, and so they didn't take it as seriously. But my big thing was disciples. I read the Gospels over and over, and Jesus had disciples, and I couldn't understand why we couldn't be disciples in what was then the 20th century. I couldn't understand why we couldn't have disciples and why we couldn't be disciples. And I traveled around the county to different churches. I looked everywhere trying to find out about discipleship. I read the Bible. I questioned people. And discipleship was something that was hard to come by. Now, there's a story that goes before what I need to tell you about tonight. And I'm not going to tell you that whole story except to say that at one point in, I believe it was this late spring, like maybe May of 1970, my best friend and I, Jim Barrier, we came home. We were both after the same thing. We were really interested in discipleship. We came home from work one day, and laying on our coffee table was a book called True Discipleship. To this day, we don't know where it came from, how it got there, but there it was. We read the book, and basically the gist of it was, it's not enough to say you're willing to forsake all. Jesus never said you must be willing to forsake all. He never told anyone, go and think about selling all you have and come follow me. He was always, I wish your computer would stop doing that.
I'm sorry.
But the bottom line was to do it. So what we did was we gave away everything we owned, which had to do guitars. I had electric pianos. We had a huge record collection. And that was kind of most of it. I mean, I guess as someone that age, it was a lot of stuff. It wasn't a lot of stuff today by most people's standards, but it was a lot of stuff that we had. We gave it to our friends and said, asked one of them to give us a lift to the freeway and just drop us off there. And we went hitchhiking across country. And I just had to say that much so I could tell you that through that trip, we made our way across the country. At one point, we were in Minnesota, and it was in the days after, just after the Kent State shootings. If you don't know what that was, you have to go
Look it up.
Yeah, go look it up online. The Kent State shootings in 1970, and there was a lot of protests going on college campuses because of what had happened. The police had come and shot down a bunch of kids on a college campus, and so there were all these things going on. And at the time that we were in Minnesota, some protests were going on at the University of Minnesota, and there were bands playing, and this event was taking place. And one of the things that happened that day was, that evening, Peter, Paul, and Mary were going to be there performing in Minneapolis somewhere. And in the meantime, during that afternoon, Paul of Peter, Paul, and Mary, decided that he was going to come down to the university and participate in what was going on. And it was really wild. He had very recently, after a long search in his own life, had given his life to Christ. And he told some of that story at the university. He was out there on there was no stage or anything, where he was just a big open quad, and he just pulled up his guitar and started singing. And, thousands of kids came. Word got around fast, and thousands of kids came and gathered around him while he was singing. And he talked about how he used to wonder, and he would question. He talked about, going to Bob Dylan, for instance, and saying, so Bob, what do you think the answer is to life? And Bob saying, I don't know, Paul, what do you think the answer to life is? And this was just that kind of thing. And Paul Stuckey was a consummate performer. He had the crowd right in the palm of his hands. I remember at one point, one person got up to leave and started walking out, and Paul shouted out, said, "Hey, don't leave yet! You haven't heard about Jesus!" And but he did this song that we're going to do right now. This is a song that we had a request for. Do you remember who made the request?
Yeah. It was Gilbert Rios.
Okay, someone named Gilbert Rios, that was from our past, requested that we do this song, and since it's a song that we do and we like, we're going to go ahead and do that for you tonight. And when Paul Stuckey did this song at the University of Minnesota, he introduced it by saying, there are songs about drugs and there are songs about dragons. And this is a song about dragons. Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Little Jackie Paper loved that rascal Puff. He brought him strings and sealing wax and other fancy stuff. Oh, Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Together they would travel on a boat with billowed sail. Jackie kept a lookout perched on Puff's gigantic tail. Noble kings and princes would bow whene'er they came. Pirate ships would lower their flags when Puff roared out his name. Oh, Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. A dragon lives forever, but not so little boys. Painted wings and giant's rings make way for other toys. One gray night it happened, Jackie Paper came no more. And Puff, that mighty dragon, he ceased his fearless roar. His head was bent in sorrow, green scales fell like rain. Puff no longer went to play along Cherry Lane without his lifelong friend. Puff could not be brave, so Puff, that mighty dragon, sadly slipped into his cave. Oh, Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. Puff the magic dragon lived by the sea and frolicked in the autumn mist in a land called Honolulu. And that's our tribute song tonight, a tribute to Peter, Paul, and Mary.
Well, I wanted to tell you about my life as a teen. Just one story that was pretty cool. When I did the story about the day that changed everything, about how I came to the Lord, how I got burned, and the Lord healed me, long story. And if you haven't read that, you can go to our blog on jimand.com and read that. But time went by and grew up a little bit and came to know the Lord really young. And by the time I was a teenager, I was going all kinds of places. I was singing already. But I kind of got to feeling convicted because I still had not read all the way through my Bible. Mm-hmm. And so when I was probably about the same time Jim was hitchhiking, I was finishing up high school, and I remember one night I was in my room, laying on the floor, reading my Bible, and I just remember how blown away I was when I got to the book of Isaiah, because I had never been confronted with some of this stuff. And right when I was reading the 53rd chapter of Isaiah, the phone rang, and it was really my only friend that I had from the neighborhood and from school. High school was pretty hard for me because I was a Christian. And It got better towards the end, but all through the hard times, there was one girl named Cindy who lived next door that was not didn't have a problem with being my friend, uh, and she didn't mind me being a Christian as long as I didn't talk about it. Because the weird thing about her is she was Jewish, and her family culture couldn't have been different than mine, more different than mine. My dad was a general contractor, and we we were loud and boisterous and pranksters, and had this big rambling ranch house, and Cindy lived next door, and both of her parents were psychologists, and they had lots of glass and fancy art and really modern house, and but they were very proper, and they weren't Orthodox Jews, they were secular Jews, but they still were proud of the fact that they were Jewish. And one of the things that I could never talk about with Cindy was Jesus. So as I lay there that night and I was reading this chapter, the phone rang, and it was Cindy. And this is one of those things where, there's some things in life that just fall into place so perfectly that it's God. You couldn't have planned them to happen this way. And so when I answered the phone, she said, "Hey, what you doing?" And I said, "Reading." And she said, "What are you reading?" I said, "Well, here, let me read a little bit to you." And so I started back at the beginning of the 53rd chapter of Isaiah, and I said, "Who has believed our message? And to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of parched ground. He had no stately form or majesty that we should look upon him, nor appearance that we should be attracted to him. He was despised and forsaken of men, a man of sorrows, and acquainted with grief. And like one from whom men hide their face, he was despised, and we did not esteem him. Surely our griefs he himself bore, and our sorrows he carried. Yet we ourselves esteemed him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was pierced through for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The chastening for our well-being fell upon him, and by his scourging we are healed. All of us like sheep have gone astray. Each of us has turned to his own way. But the Lord has caused the iniquity of us all to fall on him. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to slaughter, and like a sheep that is silent before its shearers, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living? For the transgression of my people, to whom the stroke was due, his grave was assigned with wicked men, yet he was with a rich man in his death, because he had done no violence, nor was there any deceit in his mouth. But the Lord was pleased to crush him, putting him to grief, if he should render himself as a guilty offering. We will see his offering. He will prolong his days, and the good pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand. And right about there, Cindy stopped me. And she said, "I told you I don't want you talking about Jesus. Just don't talk to me about Jesus." And I said, "Cindy, I wasn't reading the New Testament. I'm reading from the book of Isaiah, from the prophets." And it got really, really, really quiet on the other end, because I hadn't said I was talking about Jesus. She had said I was talking about Jesus. Cindy and I went on to be friends for quite a while after that. We both got married, and I lost track of her, and I don't know what ever happened, but that was just one of those times at the very beginning of the Jesus movement where, even though I was a lame teenager and I was just kind of trying to figure out my own way, the Lord, as I prayed to be a witness to my friends, the Lord opened doors like that. And that was a small thing, but it always comes back to my mind that the Lord can make not only divine appointments, but he can make things fall into place just like they should be. We need to trust him in just about everything. Okay, we got one more song we're going to do. And this song is actually from an album called Agape Land. We've been singing some songs from it. Jim and I have this little, can you see this? It's a little card with a thumb drive on it. Thumb drive is down here. It has all of our current albums on it, plus Agape Land, which was an Agape Force album, but we had a lot to do with that album. And it has this song on it. We wrote the song that we're going to sing.
Might as well tell them what's on there if you're going to show it.
Okay, there's Agape Land, there's Homesteading, there's the Psalm 33 Suite, there's a Christmas album that we did, The Selfish Giant, our oldies album called Pull the Plug, and Help Is on the Way, which is, we call that the Lost Album because we did it for Sparrow Records and it was never released. If you would like to have this thumb drive with all our music on it, message me on the YouTube site or on one of our Facebook pages.
Yeah,
Private
do it on Facebook, it'd be easier.
Private message me and I'll figure out a way to get you one of these. We usually, it's
30,
everything
35,
for about
$35 or something like
about,
that.
yeah, $35. And I'd like to get one of those to you if you would like to have it. So this song, let me get rid of some of this.
By the way, now that we've already used up all our time, we don't have time, but we're going to do one more song. And because we do try to keep this to a half an hour so we don't keep you guys bored too long. Go ahead. But did you want to say anything else?
I think after we're done with this song, we'll say goodnight.
Okay. This is from Agape Land. This is the next one, and if you've been listening each week, you know we've been working our way through there. So here we go.
At the end of the day, when you're laying in bed and you're thinking of things that you'll do when you wake up, I guess you could say that you're looking ahead, and the feeling it brings is so good. It's that way when you're living for Jesus. Every day when you're living for Jesus, you just can't wait for tomorrow when Jesus is waiting for you. This is the day that the Lord has made. It's great to know every day's new. Whether it's sunny or rainy today, it's a happy day for you. At the end of the day, when you're saying your prayers and you're thanking the Lord for the day that He gave you, no, there's no need to be worrying then if you're trusting in God, 'cause you know it's that way when you're living for Jesus. Every day when you're living for Jesus, just can't wait for tomorrow when Jesus is waiting for you. This is the day that the Lord has made. It's great to know every day's new. Whether it's sunny or rainy today, it's a happy day for you. At the end of the day, when you're laying in bed and you're thinking of things that you'll do when you wake up, I guess you could say that you're looking ahead, and the feeling it brings is so good. It's that way when you're living for Jesus. Every day when you're living for Jesus, just can't wait for tomorrow when Jesus is waiting for you.
There you go. We've worn out our welcome. So thanks for coming by, and good night, everybody, as we turn off our stream.
Thank you and good night.